If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.
With nearly 1 million people living with dementia in the UK, it's likely you know someone, directly or indirectly, who's impacted by the condition. But when it comes to dealing with your finances once you've been diagnosed, things are far from easy, as our investigation shows. Welcome to Which Money. I'm James Rowe in for Lucia Ariano this week, and joining us to help discuss all of this, we have money content editor here at Which, Grace Witherden. Grace, hello.
Hi.
And Victoria Lyons is an Admiral Nurse at Dementia UK. Victoria, hello.
Hello, hi.
Nice to have you here as well. I think there's plenty for us to discuss with this one, but Grace, it'd be a good idea to start with you and kind of find out why you wanted to investigate all of this to begin with. What led you to this?
So actually a colleague at Which shared an article with me that he thought would be worth looking into, and it was a piece about this new banking account for people with dementia. It's called SibStar, and it was tailored for people with dementia because it gives a third party sort of access to it, so a loved one can help you manage your account. And this colleague said, do we have any other resources on this or anything we can share like this? And I realised that we didn't actually have much. This isn't a topic that we had looked into. We have done pieces on power of attorney and some of the struggles that people face when trying to register it for their banking. But we didn't have anything about banking specifically for people with dementia and for those that help a loved one with dementia manage their money. So that sort of started what we thought would be, we thought, okay, that would be really interesting to look into. It'd be really good to know what traditional banks offer. It'd be really good to know how people typically manage their money. So I guess that sort of started it. We found out about this specialist account and wanted to know if there were others like it and if it was actually the best thing to use.
And we will talk about whether it is or not a good account to be using shortly. But as part of this as well, you spoke to some Which members who either have dementia or are family members of people with dementia as well. And you found out that it is quite difficult, isn't it, to deal with finances for people with dementia?
Yeah, we did a survey at Which surveying our members, but obviously we didn't manage to speak to loads of people with dementia, but we did manage to speak to quite a lot of people who do have loved ones with it that help manage their accounts. So it was good to try and get that insight of what they actually do. And 8 in 10 of our members that we surveyed said that they do care for someone with dementia and they help them manage their day-to-day finances. And a third of those who do look after loved ones said that they found setting up access to a loved one's accounts, whether through sort of power of attorney or sort of another way, they found that a challenge. So once we found that, we thought it'd be good to look into why is that a challenge, what's actually making it so difficult to help them.
And Victoria, what are the problems then with this? Because it clearly does seem like it's a really difficult and confusing topic to deal with for anybody.
It absolutely is, and it's something that people just won't necessarily have done before. So if you think about if you suddenly have to start caring for somebody and providing support for that person, you may never have had a conversation with them about their finances, about their accounts, about their banks and how they bank bank, or all of these things. And for families living with dementia, these are things that are unanticipated. They're not things you've thought about. You're managing the paying bills, tracking pensions, the kind of decisions that somebody might make ordinarily, you suddenly have to start thinking about and considering. And we also know that people can be financially vulnerable. So we know, unfortunately, people with dementia can become targets for all sorts of scams and things that happen, and that put them at risk. And they can also make uncharacteristic mistakes because of their dementia. So somebody who perhaps was always very good at managing their finances suddenly starts to not be able to do that, or know how to navigate their accounts. And the other thing that I think is a challenge for families is, without the right paperwork, even the most loving and trustworthy family members can actually find their hands a bit tied, because the banks will go, well, we can't really help you. You can't access that person's accounts because they haven't got the right paperwork in place. And financial planning is sensible adulting. We should do this. We should make sure that our finances are protected. We know what we're doing, and it allows us to kind of act with. It's about dignity. It's about making sure someone's wishes are carried out. It's sensible, and yet we just don't do it as well. And hopefully your listeners are not in that category, but for lots of people, we just know they don't. The other thing then is, for families, unfortunately, sometimes you get into disagreements. So you've got people who disagree about what should be done, what's in someone's best interest, how money should be spent, especially when you consider the charges that can be associated with providing care for somebody. If you do the planning in advance, you know what's happening, and yet we know all too often families don't, and they're left in this kind of crisis situation where they're not quite sure what the person wanted or how to access money, or they haven't got the paperwork needed.
Yeah, and actually one of the Which members I spoke to who featured in the piece, she's called Alison, and she actually helped her mother. Her mother had dementia, and Alison managed her mother's finances for quite a few years. But the reason that she actually got involved in the first place was because her mother was a victim of like a doorstep scam. Mm-hmm. So she was scammed on the doorstep, and when Alison tried to help her mother get the money back, because those powers, that paperwork wasn't in place, the banks wouldn't help her, and that sort of is what triggered that's what sort of sparked her to sort it out, and she managed to get power of attorney, and then she managed to really easily actually manage her mother's finances.
The other thing that kind of goes into this is that people, when they get a diagnosis of dementia, that's not the first day that they've experienced those symptoms. So for most people, it's a couple of years from changes to diagnosis, and within that period, somebody can be increasingly vulnerable because there isn't a diagnosis. The family are maybe not sure, is just a bit of forgetfulness, is it something else that's going on, or they may actually be fairly certain it is dementia, but they haven't yet got the diagnosis because they're on a waiting list for access to the services that will help to support somebody. So it does mean that for a great number of families, there's that kind of period of vulnerability up until getting the diagnosis, but the diagnosis itself doesn't stop all of that, because it still goes on afterwards as well.
And just taking a step back to Grace, the Which member you spoke about there, Alison, where the family member had been involved with a scam, and obviously they were trying to get the money back on their behalf. You can understand from the bank's perspective why they had to be very cautious, because we're talking about an individual's bank account, not a bank account that more than one person deals with. So you can understand they do actually have somebody's best interest at heart. It's just a very difficult...
It's frustrating when you're dealing with it, isn't it?
Yeah. I think she said to me, it was like hitting a brick wall. They wouldn't help me. Not that they didn't want to help, but she had no sort of legal right to manage that account on her mother's behalf until she got lasting power of attorney.
So I always talk about, in terms of lasting power of attorney, to kind of think of it as being your emergency parachute. So you hope you're not going to need it, but if you do need it, you need it. You need it there because that's the time when it's kind of a bit too late sometimes to set it up if you're falling out of that plane. So actually part of sensible adulting is going, okay, let's get these things set up so that at the point that I need them, if I need them, we can quickly activate them, because it's too late if you're already falling out of that plane to go, I forgot to put an emergency parachute on today.
And shall we explain what a power of attorney is, just if there's anybody listening who's thinking, I've definitely heard this before, but But we should explain it, because this is something that can be put in place to protect people if you do end up being diagnosed with dementia or something similar.
It's vital, and it is one of those things. So as an Admiral Nurse, I speak to loads and loads of families, and it's one of the things that families will tell me again and again. Nobody's really talked to us about this, or we know it's something we should do, but we're not sure. So,
and sometimes it's associated more with, like, if you're in the hospital, do you have power of attorney? And I don't think people always think about it from like a banking or finance perspective.
They don't, and we put it off. I mean, if you go out and ask people who are in their 50s, 60s, do you have a power of attorney? No, they don't. If you ask people in the 70s, no, they don't. But actually, anybody at any point could lose capacity to make decisions. So really and truthfully, it's something we should all do, and there's two types of lasting power of attorney, and really, especially if someone's got dementia, you want to be doing both. So one of them is about property and finances, our money, and that's obviously today the kind of one that's important to think about. And essentially what it is it's giving somebody who you trust and appointing that person to manage your money, to pay your bills, to handle property, and to make decisions about your money. And you, whilst you've got capacity, you allocate that person and say, I trust you to act in my best interest, to activate things in the future, should I not be able to do that. Sometimes you might choose more than one person. You might say, actually, I've got two sons, they can both do it, or two daughters, whatever that is. So people can allocate that. The other type is for health and welfare, and certainly when someone's living with dementia, you want both, because someone's health needs are going to change over time, and you may not want the same person to manage both of those things. That's fine. If you decide, actually, this person's better with the finances, but actually in terms of my health and well-being, this is the person I want to allocate that. So it's giving the person that control to set the kind of parameters around who they want to be able to make decisions for them, should they not be able to do that.
I will say as well, there's different processes across the United Kingdom. So in England, Wales, you typically will do a lasting power of attorney. Northern Ireland uses something called the enduring power of attorney, which is what England and Wales sort of used to use. It was more common than lasting power. It was sort of used instead of lasting power of attorney. And Scotland, it's known as continuing power of attorney, and there are different ways of how to set it up as well. All of which we have detailed guides on the Which website, but the process is not standard at all.
Just to confuse things,
which can confuse things more, because it could also have implications. Where the person you're looking after and where the attorney lives and where you live and what type you'd need.
Yeah, so there's plenty to read about, and we'll pop some useful links in the show notes for today's episode.
Can I just mention as well that one of the things is you can do this yourself. So those, it's great that you're sharing those resources at Which, because you can download these and do them yourselves, or you can appoint somebody to do it. You can go and speak to a solicitor and do it. And it depends, in truth, what people want to do. So some families will look at the forms and they're 40-odd pages long with lots of complicated questions and think, no, that's not for me. I'd rather appoint a solicitor to do those forms, and other people will actually just do them themselves. If you're in any question about someone's capacity, so if they've already got a diagnosis of dementia and there's a query about their capacity, always go down the legal line, because what you don't want is somebody turning around and saying, yeah, they filled that form in, but actually, did they understand? Were they exploited? Were they forced to do that? Were they really fully consenting to filling those forms in? Which is why, in truth, doing it as early as possible, or even prior to any diagnosis, is just going to set you up in a better place.
I was going to say that it sounds like the later you leave it, the more complex it could be. So certainly, the earlier you do it, the better, right?
Absolutely.
And there's no sort of cut off. There's no sort of starting point. You can do it as early as you want.
If somebody loses capacity, no, you could do it. Anybody can do it now. Yeah. You just don't have to activate it. But there is a point where you could lose capacity, and if you lose capacity to understand the process and to understand what's being asked of you, you have to go down a court of protection route, which is costly, is difficult, can take longer, and ultimately could end up with the social services, the courts, deciding that they're going to make those decisions for your loved one, which they wouldn't want to do that ordinarily. They would want to appoint somebody within the family, but it just becomes harder if you go down that route.
Well, plenty of advice there. We'll take a short break, and afterwards we'll get into some more of the things you can do right now, whether you've been impacted by dementia or not.
Leaking roof? Car won't start? Needs to renovate? Here's what to look for when getting a trader to help. A recognised endorsement, where expert assessors set the bar high. Genuine customer reviews, so you don't get duped by cowboy fakers. A clear code of conduct to give you an extra layer of security. A robust complaints policy, so you can resolve disputes fairly. And the Which Trusted Trader badge that says, choose me with confidence. You can trust Which to help you find the right traders for the job. We run thorough checks on traders, put them through in-depth assessments, then we give them the actions to make improvements and only endorse them when they've actioned them and made the grade. So, to choose with confidence, head to which.co.uk/traders or search for Which Trusted Traders.
Welcome back to Which Money. Grace and Victoria are still with us. What I want to talk about, first of all, is around finances and it being a bit taboo. I think generally talking about money here in the UK is seen as a little bit taboo, but when it comes to a topic like this, I think it's even more so. And I think, is that why we have so many people who sort of hit these stumbling blocks, do you think?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's perhaps as well when you get a diagnosis of dementia, when a loved one gets a diagnosis of dementia, it's not the first thing you think about, actually. It's, you're thinking about the diagnosis, what healthcare do you need, what support do you need, so, and, the emotional impact of dealing with this diagnosis. So financial planning and thinking about these things kind of falls to the bottom of the line of things that you have to think about. And then I guess the other thing is that nobody gives you advice. So, families are often left not quite sure. They kind of, picking through and working out where to get advice, where they get trusted advice from. All of that can be quite difficult. And it is a bit taboo. It's kind of weird, isn't it? I've never had a conversation with my parents, for example, about their finances, about money. It's just not something that we've talked about. We've talked about all sorts of other things, but not that, interestingly. And then I think even these days, because people have got all sorts of different accounts and money in different places, even thinking about it in truth, my husband's got currencies that are, online digital currencies. I wouldn't know how to access those. So there's partly that it's a bit of a taboo, and it's partly because we just don't always know these things. I remember working with a lady years ago who were very traditional marriage, and her husband had managed all of the finances. She had not, she just didn't know any of these things, how to access any of these things. She also didn't know where the stopcock was in the house when there was a flood. But, these were the very traditional things that she hadn't been involved in, and that he'd picked up and dealt with. So I think there is an area of being taboo, and then there's an area of those kind of traditional roles that we still sometimes hold a little bit in society.
Yeah, actually one of the members we surveyed, because we asked them to tell us their thoughts, and someone said, when I took over the finances, everything was a mess. My husband had managed most of it, and there were years of unchecked bank statements. I still struggled to go through them, checking every item. So I think there's definitely occasions when it just wasn't maybe someone's role in the relationship. That might change now, and I think maybe we're slightly more proactive now with perhaps digital banking, but particularly if you're older and you it's a lot of paper as well, like bank statements, passwords, everything. It can feel sometimes like there's a lot of paperwork involved as well. Actually, someone else said, when I requested paper statements, the bank always sent them to the person with dementia's address, causing distress, or for them to be buried for weeks in obscure places in the home.
And I think sometimes when someone's got a diagnosis of dementia as well, they can become quite obsessed with money, quite wanting to look at their finances, check their money, have money around them. And because you feel safe if you've got some money. If I was in London today and I didn't have any money, I'd feel quite vulnerable by that in itself. So there's something about people wanting to have access to money, but then where do they store it? How do they save it? Where does it go? Does it kind of go into a different handbag or a different purse or into a book? It can mean that money can get lost as well around the house for some people.
Listening to you both there, it definitely sounds like we all need to make a bit more of an effort to try and plan for an occasion like this if it does arise. But I wonder, what more the industry and the financial sector needs to do to try and improve things as well, because clearly there's a lot of areas for improvement there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, well, when I focused on just the issue of power of attorney last year, I think we did do a podcast on it, which I'm sure you can listen back to. The main issue we got from people that it was so difficult to register the power of attorney with the banks. So they had it, but they were trying to activate it, and all the banks have different processes for how it should be registered. Some it's online, some you have to go into branch. Of course, not everyone lives 5 minutes away from a branch now because of branch closures, and the levels of access were really different. Some people got like full control as if it was their own account, and some were really limited, so people can open up new savings accounts to get the best rates for their donor, the person they're looking after their accounts. So it was just, it was really varied, and that is something that, to be fair, that the Financial Conduct Authority has said they're gonna have a look at power of attorney and how the banks are treating vulnerable customers. So it's not to say that there might be more improvements down the line, but particularly when we looked at this issue last year, we had there were so many different issues.
Do you recognise that as well, Victoria?
Absolutely, I'm nodding away, because there's a real opportunity for banks and the financial sector to really help people, and we know this. And we've got a team at Dementia UK, that is the Dementia at Work team, who work with businesses to help them understand what the need for their staff, but also what the need for their customers, because we know that the simple things like longer appointment times, better signage in banks, everything these days is digital, but actually if you're 80 and you're not used to that, how does that work? Lack of passbooks and statements, and all of these things can become barriers. And even in terms of if a bank perhaps doesn't know somebody the way they used to when there was a high street branch, and the person who worked behind the counter saw that person and knew them regularly. So dealing with an online transaction or a telephone transaction can be quite hard for somebody who's got communication difficulties. So thinking with businesses around that, of course including banks, is part of the vital work we do at Dementia UK, so that wherever a person with dementia is in contact with a service, that service has ideally got as much information as possible to be able to support them.
I know, and we only looked at a really small, we just focused on banking organisations. We didn't even begin to look at like utility providers, like pension providers. Like there's so much, wider things that you'd probably contact, which we haven't even like scratched the surface of.
And it's so hard because if these businesses don't always understand the needs of their customers very well, or they make changes that they need to make because they're sensible changes for them as a business, and of course technology, things progress, and that's normal. But if they can leave people behind, actually, if you think about that whole digital exclusion and people who can't access things or can't remember things, or you mentioned letters that got sent to the person with dementia and then get filed away in some obscure place. That can be financial letters, it can be statements, bills, it can be letters from a GP, appointments. All of these things can just go missing because of the kind of the challenges that the dementia can bring.
Sticking with banks then, because the piece that I was reading from you, Grace, had some steps that people can take to try and improve situations. Joint bank accounts, that can be something that you can rely on to try and at least improve a situation when you're living with somebody with dementia.
Yeah, a lot of people in our survey actually did use a joint bank account. I will say as well that a lot of them also had power of attorney in place.
Because if you don't have one but do have a joint account, that will cause problems, right?
Yeah, a bank can restrict access unless a power of attorney is registered. So it might be like, you're getting on fine using a joint account for years. Suddenly one person loses capacity. It could be that the bank could close that account. So it's always good to have that as well. But the good thing about joint bank accounts is you have all of that access there. So Alison, who I mentioned earlier, did have one with her mother in the end, and she found it really useful for things like paying for the shopping, gifting money to the grandchildren for Christmas, paying for care, paying for bills. So she found that really, really helpful. I think it also helped that she also banked with the same bank, so she was very familiar with that provider. So that's certainly seen as something that a lot of people used, but it's something that I would definitely get power of attorney as well. I know that a lot of older people we surveyed, that's kind of the norm. A lot of people in that are married typically do have joint bank accounts, so that's what they were using. But obviously, it's slightly more maybe unusual if maybe a daughter and a mum or friends to have a joint bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think of it, I often think of like these kind of 5 tips that I often give to carers, and one of them is about having those conversations. Have those conversations openly, have them across the whole family, think about future wishes, and don't try to break down some of that taboo that we talked about earlier on. So it's just something normal to talk about, because then when you do have to have that conversation about how much care costs or whatever, it's not like this is the first time as a family we've ever had this conversation and it's a bit startling. Set up those lasting power of attorneys and get them done early, as you were saying. I think that's really important. Look out for signs of financial warning signs that somebody is maybe missing bills, maybe unusual spending patterns, doing something that doesn't fit with their norm. And, because that could be a sign that something's going on for that person. It could be a sign that they're being exploited, there's some scam going on. Or it could just be that actually, because of their dementia, they're no longer able to make the decisions that they would normally make to protect their finances. Work with banks, talk to them, let them know, register your LPA, work out how they do that, because you're right, they've all got slightly different processes, how they will accept them and when, how they would like those to be registered. Ask them as a bank or a building society or whoever you're with, actually how dementia inclusive are they? Some banks and building societies have got special times for people, quieter times. They've got different tools. We've got a partnership with Nationwide, and they've got some tools that they use for showing people, to help people who can't maybe communicate verbally as well as they maybe would have done. And get advice, speak to specialists around it. The Admiral Nurses are there to provide advice about, we can't set up lasting power of attorneys for somebody, but we can give advice about how to do that, when to do that, about whether someone's got capacity, and just how to manage these things. And because I think that's the thing, is you don't know where to turn for advice either. Maybe the banks could help in that. That might be another future thing, actually, is banks and building societies having some of those conversations with their members, their customers, and saying, actually, this is what you should be doing.
I think even just listening to you there's so much that everybody can take away and make some changes to implement. But it also sounds like we are definitely moving in the right direction, aren't we? Or at least taking some steps in the right direction, from a human side, but also from the financial sector side as well.
I think we are, and I think one of the big differences in truth has perhaps been the fact that we manage our money ourselves now. So if you think back, it used to be you'd go to the bank manager if you wanted to do things, you had to book appointments, and actually now for more and more people we would manage our own finances online. We can apply for mortgages, we can apply for loans, we can do all sorts of things without meeting a person, and that has given us more control. It's brought us closer to our finances than perhaps we were in the past. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and things like this podcast and having these conversations are really important, because it's normalising these conversations and encouraging people to think about their finances and the finances of the people they support in a really sensible way.
And before we wrap up then, anything else that we should consider, Grace? Anything else you came across during this investigation?
I actually just wanted to mention the SIBSTAR that I did mention at the beginning. Just to
how
explain.
did I forget? Sorry, Grace.
No, it was just wanted to explain really, in case I didn't, that it is a prepaid card that allows caregivers to control how and where it's used. So you can set daily spending limits, switch cash point or online payments on or off, freeze and unfreeze the card, and you can be notified of the spending. But that being said, fees apply. It's so it has a monthly charge, and you can be charged 99p per cash withdrawal. So it might not be the ideal solution for everyone if you don't want an ongoing fee. But I think it's interesting because it's been, the founder cared for their parents after they were diagnosed with dementia. So it has very much been set up from someone that knows the need, but it doesn't necessarily mean that has to be what you use. I think it's always good to do your research, but and see if that's something that would be suitable for you, or if you can actually be part of the joint account and manage, you might feel comfortable doing that. So I think it's always good to explore all of the options available.
Well, again, just going back a minute or so where I was saying how things are moving in the right direction, businesses, companies or people like that clearly shows that we definitely are. Victoria, before we wrap up, anything else that you want to mention for people to consider?
Yeah, please. So I'd like to just mention quickly about our Dementia What Next programme that we do at Dementia UK. And this is a series of webinars that people can attend. And during these webinars, we talk about different topics during them. And one of them is all about finance, about lasting power of attorney, about benefits, paying for care. All of these things get covered. And we cover different topics every month on these. But please just do have a look at the Dementia UK website, because if you've listened to this and you think you want some more information, it's a whole hour where we talk about, actually an hour and a half I think, where we talk about the topic, and then we've got half an hour of questions afterwards, so people can join those and register online and join those and hopefully get some information, because we know that when you get that diagnosis, getting the right information, trusted information is life-changing. So we've started these to try and reach people, so just like to shout out to them and point people that way. Absolutely, very useful. Victoria, thank you so much for coming in. Great to have you on. Thank you for having me. And Grace, thank you so much as well.
Thank you.
That brings to an end another podcast from Which. There's loads more for you to read about everything we discussed today. Just head to the episode description for more useful everyday advice. There you'll also find an exclusive offer for podcast listeners like you to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, giving you access to our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice and every issue of Which magazine across the year. Plus, your membership helps us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. If you'd like to know when we release a new episode, then make sure you press subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you can be one of the first to listen. And for any questions, comments or anything in between, follow us on social media at Which UK or email us podcasts@which.co.uk. Goodbye.
Every year, Which tests thousands of the products that you rely on every day. And we've been doing it for over 60 years.
Which reviews are 100% impartial. We don't accept freebies from manufacturers, and we have no owners, shareholders or government departments to answer to. So our work is on behalf of you, the consumer.
In a world of misleading claims and fake reviews, we test everything, from everyday items to big purchases, so that you don't have to.
We then put them through tests and assessments that go beyond the accepted standard to work out how well these products work for you and what's not worth your money. And a Which membership not only gets you access to our reviews, it also funds our non-profit campaigning work, like getting scam ads banned on social media and ending broadband and mobile mid-contract price hikes.
And right now, podcast listeners can become a Which member for 50% off the usual price by heading to which.co.uk/podcast offer.